he found a wounded Bigfoot in the forest and hid him from the world. For 35 years, he lived with a secret that no one was supposed to know about. But one day, black cars pulled up to his house. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The forest had always been a place where silence carried weight, where every sound, no matter how small, seemed to ripple through the endless expanse of pines and firs. To most people who visited the northern preserve, it felt empty, even hostile in its remoteness. But to Max Rowan, it had become the only place where life made any sense. He had spent nearly half his life walking the ridgelines, frozen valleys, and old fire roads that twisted through the wilderness like veins. His boots had shaped to the rhythm of the land. The land, in turn, had shaped him. People often joked that Max knew the forest better than he knew himself, but he suspected there was more truth in that than humor. He felt more at ease beneath the towering silhouettes of evergreens than he ever had surrounded by people. Out here, there were no forced conversations, no uncomfortable dinners, no expectations to pretend he was someone different. Only the trees, the snow, the deep cold, and the rare, fleeting peace that somehow came with them. He rose before the sun most days, building the same simple morning ritual he had followed for years. Coffee in a dented metal mug, strong enough to cut through the cold. Checking the weather grid and scanning for anomalies in the ranger reports. Packing his field bag, trauma kit, spare gloves, water, a handful of protein bars, an ancient compass he trusted more than any GPS. Then he would lock the door of the small cabin by the river and step into a world that felt more like home than the life he had left behind. That morning had been typical enough. The sky hung low and gray, pressing against the tips of the trees. Snow lay thick in the clearings and drifted into soft waves around boulders and stumps. The air smelled faintly of sap and frost. Max had almost finished his rotation when the emergency alert chimed on his receiver. A single blast, a sound Spike detected roughly 11 kilometers north, deep inside the zone where hunters were strictly forbidden. The device didn't lie. It had been a gunshot, a heavy one. Max stopped mid-step, listening to the quiet as if something might echo back to him. The forest didn't react. But he did. No one should be up there. It was a protected corridor, untouched and dangerous in winter. Even experienced outdoorsmen avoided it. He frowned, thumbed the volume up, replayed the sound. A shotgun, likely 12-gauge, and fired more than once. Max felt the first curl of unease as he turned toward his vehicle. It wasn't fear, exactly. He had been through too much for fear to come this easily. But something about the sharpness of that blast bothered him on a deeper level. He loaded his gear quickly, grabbing a high-powered flashlight, his radio, and the same shotgun he carried for unpredictable wildlife encounters. As he began the long trek up the snow-heavy slope toward the source of the noise, the world around him shifted into that strange, lonely quiet the forest sometimes held, right before something significant happened. The snow began to fall harder, soft flakes swirling as if driven by an invisible current. The cold pressed against his face, stinging with each step. He was used to winter, but even he could feel an odd weight in the air that didn't match the season. The first clue came almost an hour into the ascent, a splatter of dark red staining the snow. Fresh, still warm enough that the edges hadn't fully frozen. Max crouched beside it, gloved fingers spreading the powdery top layer. The scent was metallic and sharp. He scanned the area. More droplets, then more. Whatever had been hit was bleeding heavily and heading deeper into the forest. He followed the line of crimson marks, stepping as lightly as possible, feeling the wind pushing against him, as if urging him back the way he came. Then he found the tracks. At first he didn't understand what he was seeing. The prints were shaped like footprints, broad, deep yet far too large to belong to any human. Twice the size of his boot, at least. The stride length was equally impossible. No ordinary creature walked in a line this straight, with steps this deliberate. Something in the back of his mind stirred. A buried childhood story, or half-remembered local rumor. He fought it. Logic pushed back immediately, telling him he must be misreading in the snow, that the shape was distorted, the stride exaggerated by slipping. But he didn't slip, and neither did whatever left these tracks. The unease tightened its hold on him. Max pressed on despite himself, rifle slung over his shoulder, flashlight beams slicing through the gathering dusk. Every few dozen yards he found more blood, more huge tracks. And then, near an old dry creek bed, he heard it. A low, pained groan, guttural and deep, vibrating through the air like the sound of a massive tree bending under strain. Max froze. The sound came again, this time edged with raw agony. He stepped forward slowly, breath fogging in front of him. At the edge of the creek bed, half covered by a fall of broken branches, something moved. Something enormous. Max angled the light downward. What the beam revealed stole all breath from his chest. A massive figure lay crumpled in the snow, its back rising and falling in labored, uneven breaths. Coarse, dark hair matted with blood covered a body too large to belong to any known creature. Long arms, thick as tree limbs, shoulders broad enough to fill the space between two pines. And then it turned its head toward him. The eyes were amber, deep, intelligent, fearful. Something inside Max recoiled, the primitive part of the mind that recognized danger and wonder at the same time. He should have run, or radioed for backup, or at least raised the gun. But he didn't. He stood rooted in place, staring at the creature he had never truly believed could exist. A legend given flesh, a myth bleeding into the snow. Bigfoot. The word slipped unbidden into his mind, though it felt absurd to think it, let alone say it. Yet nothing else fit. The creature tried, weakly, to push itself upright. Its hand slipped in the snow, leaving a cratered print. It let out another low groan and sagged back down, trembling. Max saw then the wound along its side, a deep, ragged gash where pellets had torn through skin and muscle. Shot. Multiple times, likely by whoever fired the gun. Something tightened in Max's chest. He lifted his hand slowly, palms outward, not knowing why he felt the need to reassure something that could crush him with a single blow. "Easy," he murmured, though he doubted it understood. "I'm not here to harm you." The creature blinked, eyes following his voice. And in that moment, brief, impossible, surreal, Max saw it clearly. Not a beast, not a monster. A wounded, terrified, intelligent being that understood death was closing in on it. For years he had acted by code, by discipline, by the Forest Service manual drilled into him through training and repetition. Report immediately, secure the area, contain the threat. But what if the threat wasn't a threat at all? What if calling it in meant condemning a rare, living creature to examination tables, cages, or worse? His hand hovered over the radio clipped to his jacket. He saw the creature's chest rising faster now, panic creeping into its eyes, as if it recognized the device in his hand. Max hesitated. And in that hesitation, something shifted in him, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Purpose. "I'm going to help you," he said quietly, more to himself than anything. He released the radio. The creature's breathing slowed, only slightly, but enough for him to notice. Max approached carefully, heart pounding, unsure whether he was being courageous or foolish. But the eyes watching him didn't flare with hostility. They softened, just barely, as if the creature understood he meant no harm. He knelt beside it, close enough now to feel the heat radiating off its massive frame. Then he saw the blood pooling beneath it, soaking into the snow in an ever-widening stain. If he didn't act now, it would die. A place came into his mind, the old fire lookout bunker from the 60s, a relic tucked beneath a ridge that no one but a handful of veteran rangers even remembered. Abandoned, hidden, and sturdy enough to shelter something this size. "Come on," he whispered, though he knew the creature couldn't stand. Supporting as much weight as he could, Max coaxed it up inch by inch, guiding it across the snow. The journey to the bunker felt endless. The creature stumbled, groaned, collapsed more than once. Max strained with every ounce of strength he had, driven by something he didn't fully understand. Protectiveness. Responsibility. Fear that letting it die would stain him forever. They reached the bunker just as the last light bled from the sky. Max shoved the warped wooden door open with his shoulder, guiding the creature inside. The cold, dusty air smelled of rust and old wood, but it was shelter dark. Quiet, far from any prying eyes. The creature collapsed on the floor, entire body shaking. Max scrambled for anything he could use. Torn blankets, old rags, a rusted kettle he filled with snow to melt over the ancient iron stove. He cleaned the wound as best he could, extracting fragments of metal with trembling hands. The creature hissed in pain but didn't strike, didn't even reach for him. It simply watched him with those amber eyes that seemed to hold entire histories of fear and endurance. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Max worked until his hands ached and his vision blurred. When at last he sank onto the cold concrete floor, exhausted, he kept the shotgun near not as a weapon, but as a reassurance. The creature's breathing steadied, faintly, a fragile thread of life that flickered, but didn't break. Outside, the wind howled across the ridgeline. Inside, the bunker settled into a deep stillness, broken only by the soft crackle of the stove. Max leaned his head against the wall, staring into the dimness where the creature rested. He knew, with devastating clarity, that nothing in his life would ever be the same. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had taken a secret into his hands, a secret that would demand everything from him. As dawn crept in and quiet, Max stepped outside to cover their tracks. He swept branches across the snow, erased blood trails, and marked the trailhead as dangerous due to falling debris. Every decision he made tied him tighter to the path he had chosen the night before. When he returned to the bunker, he paused at the doorway, watching the creature breathe slowly, steadily. He felt the weight of the responsibility settling fully onto his shoulders. And he knew, without question, that he would bear it. The forest outside rustled as the wind shifted directions, carrying the scent of pine and cold. Max stepped back inside and gently closed the bunker door behind him. The life he had known ended there. A new one, with secrets deeper than the winter snow had just begun. In the weeks that followed, the bunker transformed from a forgotten relic of another era into a place that felt strangely alive. The air inside, once stale and sharp with the scent of metal and dust, gradually filled with the warmth of the old iron stove, with the quiet resonance of heavy breathing, and with something else. Something Max never expected to feel again. Purpose. He rose every morning before sunrise, just as he always had, but now his routine held a new urgency. Before checking patrol routes or responding to calls, he would walk the narrow path he'd carved through the trees by repetition alone, moving as silently as someone who'd spent decades learning how not to disturb the forest. His footsteps became familiar to the creature, whose keen ears registered every sound. By the time Max arrived each morning, Bigfoot though Max still struggled to call him that even in his own mind, would be sitting upright against the wall, breathing slowly, recovering strength, watching him through the shadows with patient amber eyes. The wound had begun to knit itself shut, slowly but decisively. Max replaced the dressings daily, cleaned the gash, and monitored for signs of infection. At first, the creature tensed every time he approached, bracing against the pain. But after a while, it would exhale slowly, the moment Max's hands touched its side, as if surrendering to the ritual and trusting him more with each passing day. Around them, winter tightened its grip on the forest. Snowdrifts thickened against the bunker walls. Icicles formed above the entrance, glinting like cold knives. The wind outside sometimes howled so fiercely that even Max felt uneasy, walking the last stretch of the trail. Yet no matter how brutal the weather became, he always returned to the bunker and always found the creature waiting. They developed an unspoken rhythm. Max would speak softly, not expecting the creature to understand his words, but needing to fill the silence with something human. The creature responded with low, rumbling sounds that vibrated through the floor, sounds Max came to recognize as expressions of gratitude, discomfort, curiosity, or calm. Their communication evolved into a simple, instinctive language of gestures and sounds. A raised hand meant stillness. A soft exhale meant peace. A gentle thump of the chest signaled acknowledgement or trust. Max sometimes wondered whether the creature had lived alone for years, perhaps its entire adult life, surviving by instinct and avoidance rather than companionship. It made the slightest expressions of connection feel even more profound. One morning, as Max was preparing to leave after tending to the creature's wound, a large, rough-fingered hand touched the sleeve of his jacket. It wasn't a grab, not even a tug, just a touch, hesitant and strangely gentle. Max froze, looking down at the massive hand that contrasted so starkly with the pale fabric of his sleeve. When he met the creature's eyes, they were filled with something unmistakably human. A plea, or gratitude, or both. He covered the hand with his own for a moment, feeling its heat, the slight tremor of exhaustion beneath the strength. The creature made a low sound that Max had come to interpret as thanks. He left the bunker that morning with a heaviness in his chest that he carried through the rest of the day. His colleagues noticed something different about him, though none of them could place what it was. They assumed he was simply tired, the way all rangers became fatigued during winter. Max let them believe it. It was easier than trying to explain why he took longer routes, why he signed out extra food supplies, why he avoided radio chatter about unusual tracks found along the ridgeline. The truth was a labyrinth he could not allow anyone to wander into. As winter gave way to early spring, signs of trouble began to creep into the forest like unwelcome footprints. It started with the drones, small, dark shapes gliding above the treetops, moving too steadily, too precisely to be recreational devices. Max spotted them twice before he began to suspect something deliberate. They hovered in places no tourist could reach, scanning the earth with technology far more advanced than anything issued by the Forest Service. Once, as he guided his patrol truck along a narrow service road, he glimpsed a pair of strangers dressed in expensive outdoor gear, using handheld devices that gave off faint beeps as they moved. They didn't look like hikers. They didn't look like researchers. Their movements were too calculated, each step measured, each glance sharp. Max approached them, asking casually if they needed help. They insisted they were bird watchers, yet the instruments they carried had nothing to do with ornithology. He watched them leave, suspicion gnawing at him. The forest felt different after that, less like a sanctuary, and more like a stage being quietly surveyed by unseen eyes. He became more cautious each time he traveled to the bunker, doubling back over his own tracks, taking detours through frozen creeks, waiting for hours behind fallen logs, if he sensed another presence nearby. The creature felt the tension as well. Its low sounds became less relaxed, more alert. It often moved to the entrance and inhaled as if reading the wind for hidden signals. When drones passed overhead, it pressed against the wall silently, staring upward with a fear that almost broke Max. One evening, arriving late after a mandatory meeting at the ranger station, Max found the creature pacing. The moment he stepped inside, it made a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated with unease. Its posture changed only when it saw the familiarity of his face, the recognition softening its shoulders. He realized then how dependent they had become on each other's presence, and how fragile their world of secrecy was. The pressure from outside forces escalated in subtle ways. Requests from the regional office grew increasingly specific. Thermal scans, satellite logs, wildlife anomaly reports. It was framed as routine data collection, but Max had worked long enough to understand when a question wasn't really a question. Someone was looking for something. Someone who had the authority to pry. Max's own tracks were being watched more closely. He noticed his reports were read more thoroughly. His GPS logs were flagged for review. Once, he returned to find the cabin door slightly ajar, though he could have sworn he had locked it. Nothing was taken, but several map folders had been subtly moved. The world outside tightened around him like a vice, and still, he returned to the bunker every day, compelled by a responsibility he no longer questioned. The creature's recovery continued. It began standing more often, stretching limbs that were once too weak to support its weight. It would lift fallen logs with ease to help Max collect firewood, or arrange stones near the stove to heat and use as primitive warming tools. They were not just coexisting, they were cooperating, learning from each other in ways neither could have anticipated. One particularly sharp morning, Max arrived to find the creature sitting near the stove, holding something in its hands. A small bundle of dried leaves and bark, arranged almost like a crude offering. The moment it saw Max, it pushed the bundle toward him, its expression earnest. Max knelt slowly, taking the gift with a stunned softness. He didn't know what the gesture meant, not fully, but the intent behind it was unmistakable. Connection. Trust. Something deep and instinctual stirred in Max, a feeling he'd long ago buried beneath years of isolation, grief, and resignation. In that dimly lit bunker, surrounded by old stone and new warmth, he felt seen and needed. But no bond, no matter how extraordinary, could shield them from the growing danger outside. The first real sign of pursuit came on a mid-spring afternoon, when Max discovered a strange metallic device half buried in the snow near the ridge above the bunker. It was small, rectangular, and coated in weatherproof black polymer. He recognized it immediately: motion sensor. High-end, not commercially available. Someone had planted it there deliberately. He pocketed the device and destroyed it with a rock when he was far from the bunker. But the damage was done. His mind raced with the implications. They knew something was there, or at least suspected it strongly enough to surveil the area. The creature watched him with tense curiosity when he entered the bunker that day. It sensed something had changed. Max tried to speak calmly, tried to pretend nothing was wrong, but the creature saw through him. Its wide eyes searched his face, looking for an explanation he didn't know how to give. "It's nothing," Max lied softly. "Just nothing." The creature made a low, disbelieving sound, settling uneasily by the wall. Over the next weeks, the forest seemed to shift into a state of quiet hostility. Max often thought he heard distant footsteps on trails no one should be walking. Once, he glimpsed a flash of light across the ravine, like the reflection off a camera lens. Another time, he found what looked like a boot print, deep, fresh, military-grade tread. The paranoid vigilance that had become his routine now turned into something sharper. He knew the bunker's days were numbered. He just didn't know how few remained. And then, one failing afternoon, gray and cold despite the season, his worst fear materialized. He'd been called away unexpectedly to respond to a brush fire sparked by lightning on the southern edge of the preserve. It was small, easily contained, but the detour kept him away longer than he liked. By the time he arrived at the bunker, the sun had nearly dipped below the trees, leaving the forest veiled in a cold, violet dusk. Max sensed the wrongness immediately. The quiet was too absolute. No crunch of snow, no shifting of branches, no soft rumble of greeting from inside. His breath caught as he saw them. Tire tracks gouged through the earth, multiple prints from heavy vehicles, boot prints, fast, purposeful, organized. The bunker door hung crookedly, one hinge sheared clean off. Max ran inside before he had time to think. The creature was there, but not as he had hoped. It was bound to the floor with reinforced straps. Industrial restraints designed for animals far smaller than its own massive frame, yet tightened with a precision that made escape impossible. Its chest heaved with frantic breaths. Its eyes, usually so bright with intelligence, now burned with terror. As soon as it saw Max, it let out a desperate, guttural cry that cut through him deeper than any blade. Max lunged forward, but strong arms grabbed him from behind, dragging him back. He fought wildly, shouting, kicking, straining against the grips holding him. But the men restraining him were trained, controlled, and utterly unmoved. His voice cracked as he roared for them to stop, to let the creature go, to listen, to understand that it was not dangerous, that it needed help, not captivity. No one listened. The creature strained against its restraints, reaching toward him with trembling fingers, emitting a sound that struck something primal in Max's chest, a sound of pure betrayal and fear. He had never heard anything so human. One of the men, dressed in dark tactical gear, injected the creature with a tranquilizer. Its struggles weakened. Its eyes locked onto Max's, widening with confusion and heartbreak as the sedative pulled it downward. Max screamed until his throat burned, but nothing could sever the steel precision with which they moved. Moments later, the creature went limp. Its hand fell away, fingertips brushing the cold stone floor. The men dragged Max outside, securing him near one of the dark vehicles. He barely registered the agent speaking to him, barely heard the warnings, the legal threats, the talk of breached protocols. His entire world had shifted in the span of minutes. After hours of interrogation, of forced signatures, of promises extracted under threat of prosecution, Max was released. The vehicles were already gone. The bunker stood empty, cold and lifeless, as though the warmth it had held for months had been a dream. Max returned alone at dawn. The forest around him was unnervingly silent, as if mourning the loss alongside him. He stepped into the bunker, now nothing more than stone, dust, and old shadows, and felt the weight of absence settle heavily around his chest. The faint scent of the creature lingered, earth, cold fur, warmth from the stove, and it twisted inside him with a pain he didn't know how to name. He knelt where the creature had often sat, laying his hand on the stone floor, still faintly warm from the memory of its presence. For a long time, he said nothing. The forest whispered outside, branches creaking, snow shifting, wind moving through the pines with a distant, mournful hum. It felt as though the wilderness itself acknowledged what had been taken. Max stayed there until the light began to fade again, until the cold reached his bones. When he finally stepped outside and closed the bunker door behind him, it felt like burying something precious beneath the weight of the entire world. He didn't know if the creature still lived. He didn't know if he would ever see it again. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. he would never regret saving it. And he would carry its memory, its trust, its helpless final gaze with him for the rest of his life, like a promise carved into his soul. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. Watch the other stories on the channel and share this video with someone who will understand.